Hello, Rams fans. Man, I don't know about you, but I felt like this week went by really fast. So many things happening at the same time with the Los Angeles Rams, and that got me really excited. You probably saw that Myles Garrett finalized a 5-year contract, and you've probably seen all the speculation surrounding Aaron Donald. But now, there's another topic that ended up being overshadowed by all of that. Well, I'm about to tell you everything I found out. But first, I want to ask you a question. How long have you been a Rams fan? Write it down below. I was impressed by some fans who have been supporting the team since the 1960s. Man, that's incredible. Long life to all of you, and maximum respect. It's great to see fans of all ages. If you really want to see the Rams back in the Super Bowl, smash that like button. And now, let's get to the topic everyone is talking about. A major debate is starting to take shape among Rams fans. It began after new information surfaced regarding a trade scenario that had been linked to Los Angeles for quite some time. What once seemed like a potentially exciting move for the Rams is now being viewed from a completely different perspective, and recent developments are making many fans reflect and wonder whether the organization may have avoided a very serious mistake. Here's the thing. The Rams were linked to A.J. Brown in trade talks, but ultimately decided not to proceed, and the reasoning behind that decision is now receiving much more attention. For a long time, the idea of bringing A.J. Brown to Los Angeles generated a lot of excitement. The reasoning was easy to understand. Brown continued to produce at a high level, even during seasons that some considered disappointing by his own standards. The discussion centered on what the Rams' offense could have looked like if a player with that kind of production had been added to the receiving corps while keeping the rest of the corps intact. The argument was straightforward. A receiver capable of producing more than 1,000 receiving yards, even in a season considered below expectations, would naturally attract interest. The possibility of pairing that level of talent with the weapons already on the roster created a scenario that many believed would be extremely difficult for opposing defenses to handle. That's why this story is so interesting today, because the discussion is no longer about what Brown could have added to the offense. Now the discussion is about what the Rams may have avoided. Earlier reports suggested that Los Angeles backed out of trade negotiations after concerns emerged from what was described as preliminary medical evaluations. At the time, that phrase left many people with more questions than answers. What exactly did the Rams see? What information raised concerns? Why would a team that supposedly showed interest suddenly walk away? Those questions remained unanswered. Then, new details emerged. According to the information that was reported, after Brown arrived in New England, Patriots executive Elliott Wolf discussed the situation and revealed that Brown has what was described as a degenerative knee condition. That revelation dramatically changed the conversation. Suddenly, what once looked like a missed opportunity began to look very different. The key issue here is not whether Brown is talented. Throughout the discussion, his ability as a player was never really questioned. In fact, the entire premise of the original excitement surrounding a possible trade was built on how productive he has been. The concern revolves around long-term availability. When a team considers trading significant assets for a player, it is not simply evaluating talent. It is evaluating risk. It is evaluating durability. It is evaluating future value. It is evaluating whether the player can remain available over the life of the investment. And according to the discussion in the source material, the Rams may have reached a conclusion that the risk outweighed the reward. The report explained that Brown's knee issue has not consistently kept him off the field throughout his career. However, it was also noted that the condition has required management, and that there have been instances where the knee needed to be drained. The larger concern is tied to the nature of the condition itself. The word that keeps coming up is degenerative. That is the detail that appears to have changed everything. The concern expressed in the discussion is that a degenerative condition does not improve over time. The expectation is that it becomes more difficult to manage as years pass. For a player whose position relies heavily on movement, explosiveness, acceleration, cutting ability, and overall athletic performance, any long-term concern involving the knees naturally becomes a major factor. From the Rams' perspective, the question may not have been whether Brown could help the team immediately. The question may have been whether the cost required to acquire him justified taking on that level of uncertainty. That distinction matters, because this was never being presented as a low-risk move. The discussion repeatedly emphasized the type of investment that would have been required: draft capital, future assets, major resources. And once those resources are committed, there is no easy way to get them back. This is where the conversation begins to shift away from Brown himself and toward roster construction. The source material argued that the Rams were not operating from a position of desperation at wide receiver. That point was stressed repeatedly. The reasoning was simple. A team that already possesses a strong offensive structure can afford to be selective when evaluating major additions. The front office does not necessarily need to chase every available star if the current group is already performing at a high level. That context becomes important because it changes how risk is evaluated. A team with a desperate need may accept concerns it otherwise would not accept. A team with fewer weaknesses may choose patience. And, according to the discussion, Los Angeles appears to have chosen patience. The argument was not that Brown lacked talent. The argument was that the Rams did not absolutely need to make that move. There is a significant difference between a move that would be exciting and a move that is necessary. The source material strongly suggested that the Rams viewed those two categories differently. The offense was already functioning effectively. The larger concern was elsewhere: defense. That was presented as the area demanding the greatest attention. According to the discussion, defensive shortcomings in key moments were viewed as a bigger issue than adding another star receiver. That perspective ultimately becomes a major part of the story because it influences how resources are allocated. Every front office faces difficult decisions. Every dollar spent in one place is a dollar unavailable elsewhere. Every draft pick used in one trade is a draft pick unavailable for another move. Every aggressive decision creates opportunity cost. And according to the source material, that opportunity cost may have played a significant role in why Los Angeles chose a different direction. One of the strongest themes throughout the discussion is that the Rams were not simply evaluating Brown in isolation. They were evaluating alternatives. That is where the comparison becomes important. The argument presented was that the organization faced a choice regarding where to invest major assets. Would those resources be directed toward adding another offensive weapon? Or would they be directed toward addressing what was viewed as a more pressing need? The source material repeatedly argued that the second option ultimately made more sense for the Rams. And when viewed through that lens, avoiding the Brown trade becomes more than just avoiding medical risk. It becomes a strategic decision regarding roster priorities. That combination of factors is what led to the conclusion expressed throughout the discussion. The Rams may have dodged a bullet on multiple fronts. First, by avoiding a player carrying significant medical concerns. Second, by preserving the flexibility necessary to pursue a different path. The financial and draft implications were also emphasized heavily. The discussion outlined how acquiring Brown would not have been a simple addition. It would have required meaningful assets. The concern expressed was that combining multiple aggressive moves could have placed substantial strain on future draft resources. That concern forms another major layer of this story. Fans often focus on the excitement of adding stars. Front offices often focus on sustainability. Those two perspectives do not always align. What looks exciting in the short term can create complications later. What looks cautious in the short term can sometimes prove wise over time. The Rams appear to have leaned toward the second philosophy in this case. Instead of aggressively pursuing a trade despite medical concerns, they reportedly stepped back. At the time, that decision generated questions. Today, with more information available, some observers are interpreting the situation differently. The reaction now is less about disappointment and more about relief. That shift in perception is what makes this story so compelling. nothing about Brown's talent has changed. Nothing about his past production has changed. What changed is the public understanding of the risk involved. And once that information became available, the entire conversation evolved. The source material also made an important point that should not be overlooked. There was no celebration of a player dealing with a medical issue. In fact, the discussion specifically expressed hope that Brown remains healthy and continues managing the condition successfully. That distinction matters. The story is not about rooting against a player. It is about evaluating a decision. Those are very different things. The focus remains on whether the Rams made the correct organizational choice. And according to the argument presented, the answer appears to be yes. The front office reportedly saw information that caused concern. Rather than forcing a move simply because a big name was available, they chose restraint. Rather than prioritizing excitement, they prioritized risk management. Rather than committing substantial resources to an uncertain situation, they moved in another direction. That is the central theme running throughout the entire discussion. Patience, discipline, evaluation, long-term thinking. Those concepts repeatedly surfaced as the rationale behind the decision. What makes the story even more fascinating is how quickly narratives can change in the NFL. One moment, fans are imagining a blockbuster acquisition. The next moment, new information emerges and completely alters the way that potential move is viewed. That is exactly what happened here. For months, conversations centered around possibilities. Now those conversations center around consequences that might have existed had the deal actually happened. The difference is enormous. Because instead of asking, what if the Rams had traded for A.J. Brown? Many people are now asking, what if they had? And that second question carries a very different tone. The answer involves draft picks. The answer involves roster construction. The answer involves long-term planning. The answer involves medical evaluations. The answer involves organizational discipline. Taken together, those factors create a picture of a front office that was willing to walk away from a potentially exciting move because it did not view the overall risk profile as acceptable. Whether every fan agrees with that conclusion is another matter. There will always be supporters of aggressive moves. There will always be people who believe elite talent is worth almost any price. There will always be those who look at Brown's production and wonder what might have been. That debate is unlikely to disappear, but based strictly on the information presented in the source material, the emerging view is that Los Angeles may have made the smarter decision by exercising caution rather than chasing a headline-grabbing trade. And now Rams fans are left with one of the biggest offseason questions yet. Was this one of the most important decisions the front office made? Not because of the move they completed, but because of the move they chose not to make. What do you think, Rams fans? Did the Rams make the right decision by avoiding the trade after the medical concerns became clear? Or would you still have taken the chance on A.J. Brown despite the risks? Make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and click on the video on your screen. The latest Rams updates and breaking developments are waiting, and you will only find those updates here first.